let's break it down. This is the story of Lazarus who died. Okay, and in John's Gospel, John doesn't actually talk about the two other healings that happened from the dead, raising from the dead. There was Jairus's daughter, sorry, and also there was the widow's son. Jairus's daughter had just died, so he hadn't even moved out of the house. The mortars had just arrived. The widow's son was being transported to the tomb area, so he was actually on his way. This time, we find that Lazarus had been dead for 4 days. Okay. A bit of background for you. Okay. Up until now, the last couple of bits in John's Gospel, we see that the Jews, we can see from the Jewish leaders, the Pharisees and Sadducees, the priests and the high priest, they were all getting concerned about Jesus and what he was doing. And they were actually picking up stones to stone him. They were going, Nazareth, he's going to get chucked off the cliff. He was getting in, other times they were about to pick up stones to stone him, but he disappeared. Now, John actually only recounts a certain number of these instances. There's 7 in total, but they're very specific. And basically you've got the build up. And basically this is Jesus's last and final miracle, the raising of Lazarus. From this point on, he's openly stated who he is. This is about 10 days, maybe even less, maybe just a week before the Passover and before the cross. So it's very, very close. The timing is very, very close. And basically what we've got here is the background of where he was. He was in a place called Bethabara. Now, Bethabara and his disciples, they were just on the Jordan, and it's where the crossing of Joshua made the crossing when he moved in, when he came across the Jordan into the promised land. That's the crossing point. And that's also where John the Baptist did most of his baptizing at that point. So it's called Bethabara. Now, that was a good 3 days from Bethany. And Bethany is about 2 miles. 2 miles. So you're talking about, it's less than an hour, because we can walk 3 miles an hour. So from Bethany to Jerusalem was less than an hour's walk. So what you're talking here is Bethany was very, very close to Jerusalem. Jerusalem was where the temple was, where the high priests were, where the Pharisees, where they're all trying to work together to get rid of Jesus. They're working a plan to kill him. And the disciples knew this. They make reference of this. So that's the background. Okay. So you've got Lazarus is ill. He's ill to the point of being very sick. Martha sends word, and Jesus is 3 days away. And he gets the word, and he knows that he picks up on it. And it looks very strange initially, because Jesus turns around and says, okay, we'll stop here for a couple of days. And he loved, but it actually says he loves Lazarus and Martha and Mary. These people, he loved them. So why would he stay there? Right. Takes 3 days to get to Bethany. Lazarus died either at the end of the day that Jesus got the word, or he died the next day, early next day. So within the first within that day, he was actually already so poorly that he died. Okay. That means, and the custom of the day was that only family could be in the presence, and the mourners, professional mourners, and family, immediate family, were with the deceased for 4 days. It was after 4 days when other people were allowed to come in and give their respects. So Jairus's daughter, this is why there was all the little tiz about the Pharisees saying about Jesus couldn't go in and this, that, and other. But because she had just died, and the father had said it was okay, Jesus was allowed in. In this case, even if he had actually got when he got the message, and he had tried to get back to get to Lazarus would have been dead. So there was no rush. So he wouldn't have been allowed to be with them because of custom, because of tradition. So Jesus went with tradition because he couldn't do. It was also to elevate and give more glory to the Father, because it was going to be a bigger miracle. There was going to be no question from the Pharisees about what happened. There was going to be so many witnesses that Lazarus was dead. It was going to be clear. He wasn't just asleep. He wasn't just fainted. He was dead for 4 days in a tomb. So that's the background to this. There's a reason why Jesus, even though he allowed in a sense Lazarus to die, and didn't try and get there in time, because he couldn't get there in time because he's too far away. He was limited to how fast he could move. So there was no rush. Also, just as an aside, Lazarus, the name Lazarus, it's actually an abbreviated form of Eliezer. Now, Eliezer means comforter. Okay, just I think that's just a little aside. His name means comforter, and there was only 2 people mentioned in the New Testament with that name. So that's just a little. And Bethany itself means house of affliction or house of figs. So again, these are just little things of understanding the culture and the timing and where it was, bit of background. Now, John also brings in, he just simply says that he writes about that we already know about the story. He writes this in a way that we already know about who Lazarus is. He already presumes that we have read the Gospels, because this story is in Mark and Matthew. No, it isn't actually, but there are parts of it that is actually in there about other parts of the characters. Lazarus is in there, Mary's in there, okay? But what you've got is, he recants, and so he tells the story about, and talks about Mary, about when she poured the oil on Jesus' feet. And it's a very expensive perfume. And he talks about that. Okay. And Mary knew when she was doing that, even though the disciples, the men didn't, she knew that this was being performed because that was a perfume that you would put onto someone for their burial. But not something else that's actually a Jewish woman would not have her hair undone. It wouldn't be loose. It was seen as unseemly. She wiped his feet with her hair. with the perfume. There was also an added thing on this, is that custom says that you don't touch the feet. You don't touch someone else's feet. So she was even breaking tradition by doing what she did. Okay, and Jesus accepted that worship, and it was a part of worship that she was giving him worship. She acknowledged who he was. Now, Jesus was, as I say, Jesus was down in the Bethabara, and he gets all this, and it's the timing of it. When he leaves 2 days after he gets the message, it takes 3 days to get there. It means that he arrives 4 days after Lazarus has been put in the tomb. So he's actually arriving at the same time as all the visiting people, mourners, people who can come and pay respect. So he's coming at the height, in a sense, of the visitation at the beginning of when everyone can come and visit, non-family members. So he planned it. He did have a little debate with his disciples, which, bless them, even at this point, they didn't quite get the message. And what we have here is, and let me see. Yeah. The question, first of all, let's go back. It's saying about the sick is not unto death. That's what he says to them. Okay. But the glory of God, and that the Son of God might be glorified through this. So he's actually seeing this as a way that God the Father is creating a situation that the Son will be glorified, and he will glorify the Father. Why did Jesus, well, as I said, I've already explained to you, why did Jesus wait for 2 days? And it was all about the journey time. And so sometimes when we actually see this, we have to think about situations that we might face that are basically, we want God to deal with it now. We want him to sort this out, because if we don't, we can see things happening and we're going, and we want him to do it now. And he says, no, in my time, it's just to glorify me. So sometimes what we have to do is we have to wait on God. We have to wait on the Lord, and he will make it right, and he in his time and in his proper time. Okay. Right. Yeah, that's what I've done. It's done now. So now we find in verses 7 and 8. So after waiting for 2 days, Jesus is suggesting to go back to Jerusalem. And his disciples have just come. You have to remember that the last time they were there, he nearly got stoned. So they're a little bit on edge. And they are basically recanting this and saying about the leaders and how dangerous it's going to be. And they're getting a little bit scared of this. And so they actually relate all this to him, because what they're doing is the disciples are considering the very real dangers from the physical world. We do that. We sometimes do that. And we have to sometimes, the question I would ask is, do we sometimes question what Jesus may be asking us to do? Because we are viewing it only from a worldly perspective. And that's why we're questioning it. We have to think about, what is it that God is asking us to do? And if we trust in him, then we should just carry on. We should just do it. That's simple. In 9 and 10, again, Jesus is explaining that he wants to, in a metaphorically, he's saying to them, He's trying to explain about going back. Let me see. This is just because this is so important. It really is. They're not 12. He's talking about there are not 12 hours. Are there not 12 hours in the day? If anyone walks in the day, he does not stumble, because he sees the light of this world. Right now, he's talking metaphorically. He's not talking literally about the daylight and about night, because he says in verse 10, he's saying, if anyone walks in the night, he stumbles because the light is not in him. So it's not that he doesn't have light, he can carry a torch, but it's about not having the light in him. So what he's doing is he's trying to explain to them then about the allotted time. It's about what is the timing of God's timing. And they just can't get the metaphor. They keep going on, and it keeps going down, and they say, he said to them, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep. But I go and I may awaken him out of sleep. Again, he's talking about Lazarus has fallen asleep. Now, Jesus alluded to the Lazarus being sleeping, but the meaning of the Old Testament of word, in the Old Testament, pardon me, it's used in the Old Testament for death. So, but it's only used a few times. But in the New Testament, it's only used of believers. Only believers fall asleep. Okay, fall into a sleep, and that means that we have actually we have died, but we're sleeping. And why is that? Well, when you consider sleep is something that is restful. It is not harmful to you. It's actually beneficial to you. So when, as believers, we fall asleep, we are just waiting. We've got no idea of the time. You've got no concept of time passing by. You just go to sleep, and then you come on, and you're awake. And he calls you, and you're awake. Olivia, and he calls you, and you're awake. So that it's about when you go to sleep, you can be called, and you awaken. Okay. So, but the problem is that the disciples, even after all the miracles, and this, you have to remember, this is after 3 years, because they were with Jesus for 3.5 years. This is the week before the final Passover. They still haven't got it. It still hasn't sunk in. They're still thinking in the old tradition. And the disciples therefore said to Lord, if he has fallen asleep, he will recover. Oh, okay. So then Jesus says, right, okay. Then I'm going to have to be a little clearer. Look, guys, Lazarus is dead. Let's go. Eventually they get the message, but he had to be so explicit. Now, sometimes God will speak to us, and he will actually be speaking to us and telling us things, and we don't understand him. Sometimes he has to be explicit. Okay. Sometimes he has to just tell us, because sometimes we just don't get it, to be honest. And he needs to sometimes be really, really clear. Okay. Because it comes down, Jesus therefore said to them plainly, Lazarus is dead. Now that means basically that the scriptures is basically we've got here is it's truth and clear, and it has clarity. So when we look into the scripture, even if there's twists and turns, eventually the Lord will bring out to us and make it clear to us. He will always make it clear. There's clarity within the scripture. Okay. Now, what was it? Because we see this in 1 Corinthians 15, 1 Thessalonians 4:14, and 5:10. That's is where whenever the believers are falling asleep. Okay. The disciples didn't understand it. So why does the Holy Spirit use the word sleep? Right? Sleep is harmless. Death is harmless to the believer. Sleep can come as a welcome relief. Sometimes as a believer in a physical body, we may be suffering. So therefore, to go to sleep, in a sense, to be with the Lord, is a relief. Not only for ourselves, but also for the family. So there is, for us as Christians, we can actually understand that death is also like a sleep. So we can relate to that. And we can actually see that the benefit of it happening. We lie down and rise again. So if we sleep, it means you can get woke up. But if you die, you die. But believers are put to sleep so that we can be risen up again. Okay? And it's a time of rest. Okay? Revelation 14:13. And then we've got it shuts out the sorrows of life. So when you go to sleep, it actually takes away the sorrow or the pains that we may be having in life. And what happens is that when you go to sleep, in the sense of the spirituals, in the sense of when you die, and it's referred to as sleeping, then we are actually shutting out the sorrows of this life. So there's benefits, and we can be awoken up from that, because that's what Jesus does. And then a time when the body is fitted for the duties of the morrow. And when we go to sleep, when we awake, we will be fitted with a new body for the new journey, for the new tomorrow, for the time that we will be like him. So this is going to sleep for believers is not scary. It is not remorseful. It's not painful. It's going to be like going to sleep, and we will awake refreshed and be in glory. Okay. Another death is worse, which is basically there's two diseases. One's called HIV positive, and the other one is SIN positive. So basically sin is the worst one, because the only remedy and the only cure for sin is Christ himself. Okay. To be alienated from the life of God. That was in Ephesians 4:18. That's going to be the worst thing that can happen. We will actually be we'll be alienated from God completely. And it isn't just for a little while, it is forever. And we've got no concept of what forever is. It is beyond our concept of there is no time. It's just eternity. And that's it. I may awake him. So basically, the one thing that Lazarus couldn't do was self-sufficiency. He couldn't wake himself up. He couldn't actually resurrect himself. Okay. Because that is the one thing he couldn't do. Can't self-raise. Only Jesus did that. He's the only one who did it. And he's the only one that could have done it. Now, in verses 13 and 14, we find Jesus had spoken of his death and they thought that he was speaking of a literal sleep. Okay, so they got confused. They really did get confused. And so that's why Jesus had to say to them literally, what it was all about. The purity of God's word is when he realizes they don't understand. Okay, then he has to, when we don't understand, he will actually clear it all up, and he will make sure that we do. Okay. Now, and I am glad for your sakes that I was not there, so that you may believe, and let us go to him. So basically, he sees the benefit in this is he could actually then see the discrepancy in even his disciples. They didn't grasp it. So he could see the importance of not being with Lazarus, because these disciples had to learn. They had to learn. Jesus clearly setting the stage so that they may believe. Okay, it was not possible that when they got the message for Lazarus being ill, and as I said to you before, it was on the 2 days, so there was 2 days. It would have had, if you take away and all the mathematics involved of arriving, he would have arrived to still, Lazarus would have been dead, but he wouldn't have been able to see him, and he wouldn't have been allowed to be there tradition wise. So arriving 4 days after he'd been in the tomb was going to be significant. Okay. And just as an aside, there is no record in the scriptures, as far as I'm aware, that of anyone dying in Christ, in the presence of Christ. No one died when they were in his presence. They may have died before, in which case he came in and he rose them from the dead, or they died after, when he wasn't there. But they never died when he was there in his presence. Even the thieves on the cross at the crucifixion, they died after him. He gave up his spirit, and then it was then they died. So it's just an interesting way of understanding that no one died in his presence. And whenever Thomas, bless him, turns around and says, I always think it's a bit, when he turned around and he says about, let me see, where am I? Thomas therefore is called, and he says, let us also go, that we may die with him. He was just saying what everyone else was thinking, literally, because they were all saying earlier on about, oh, should we go? You're going to get there. You tried to stone you the last time. They were fearful for them and for him, and now Thomas is actually verbalizes it. Okay, so Bethany is a dangerous place. It's 2 miles from Jerusalem. The high priests, Pharisees, and temple guards are all out to get Jesus. Okay, they're all out to get him, and so the area is so close to Jerusalem. As I say, it's less than an hour's walk. So easy access. And so when Jesus arrives, we find that they start off and they get there, and then they arrive, and they're 4 days on the 4th day. Okay. And what happens is that he doesn't come into the village, but Martha sees him, hears about him, and comes out and comes to him. Okay. Now, the actual dialogue that she has with Jesus is very, very clear that she believes, because basically is again the right, here we go. And there was actually now Bethany was near Jerusalem, and there was many Jews who had come to console Martha and Mary. So there was lots of Jews around. So it was going to be a lot of people. Look, and then Martha comes to Jesus and she says, Lord, if you have been here, my brother would not have died. Even now, I know that whatever you ask of God, God will give you. Even she misses the point. Okay. She had the faith and she believed him to be Messiah, but she didn't quite put it together that she was actually asking God. She was talking to God. So when she said that he could ask God and anything God wanted that he would do for him, she actually didn't realize that she was actually literally talking to God. That's who Jesus was. So basically, yes, she was believing, but and because what is interesting is that the Greek word, the actual Greek word, which is actually aiteo, aiteo, A-I-T-E-O, and it means to ask or to beg or call for or crave or desire. Okay, and it's the same word that gets used when the Jewish men prayed. They would use this particular word to pray and to request in their prayers to Yahweh. So, and Adonai. So basically, she was using the right word, but she didn't realize that she was actually speaking to God. And Martha has a clear understanding and believes in the resurrection of the last day. Now, we have to understand that in that particular time, there was the Sadducees and the Pharisees, and there was people who followed the Sadducees, the way of the Sadducees, and some followed the way of the Pharisees. And then you had everyone the common people were trying to work out which was which. The theological difference is the Sadducees did not believe in resurrection. They did not believe in the afterlife. They did not believe in the spiritual life after death. How they were in power, I don't know, but that's the way it was. The Pharisees were the strict fundamentalists. So they were actually adhering to the law. They believed in the resurrection and everything else. The Sadducees didn't. So there was a lot of sort of political rivalry going on, and a lot of politics. So Jesus, whenever sort of Martha actually talks about and comes back and says about the resurrection, and she says about that, yes, he'll rise on the last day. Jesus gently corrects her. He gently does it. And he says, I am the resurrection and the life. Okay. He that believes in me, though he was dead, yet shall he live. And whosoever lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this? And that's what he asks her. Do you believe that I am the resurrection and the life? Okay. In the Greek, the word used was for dead was in the past tense. Could this relate to us of being dead before we meet Jesus? Because we can take this and we can say we were dead, like Lazarus. We were dead before we met Christ, before we actually meet with him. Okay. So if you don't know Jesus, then you are dead in Christ. You are dead to God. Your spirit is dead. But if you are interested in him, he can actually come in and he will rebirth you. Your soul can be rebirthed, born again. That's what the whole concept of Nicodemus, the comments with Nicodemus, being born again of the spirit, to have your spirit renewed, rejuvenated, resurrected of the spirit. Okay. And that is through Jesus. For in accepting Jesus, we accept life, present and future. So once we accept him, it's now. Not then. That's what we can happen. That's what happened. But it's now. We work on the now and what is going to happen. So that is when we accept him. Okay. Martha is being asked if she really believes Jesus to be the Messiah. We are asked the same question. Okay. Do you believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God? That's the question. As long as there is life, there is hope. Or maybe as long as there is hope, there is life. Okay. If we hope in him, we have life. Okay. Mary is now called, and she's been in the house with the mourners, and she is really distraught. And then Martha goes back and tells her that Jesus is there, and she comes running out. And all the mourners that were there with her come running out because they think that she's weeping and she's so worn that to go into. So let's go and weep with her, because that's the tradition. Except that she comes and goes to Jesus, and she sees him, and he's in the same place outside the village. So she goes to him, and the first thing she does, this is what Mary does every time. She falls at his feet in worship. Okay. And that's in 27. She said to him, "Yes, Lord, I have believed." Well, that's Martha. And when she had that, says she called Mary, her sister, and teacher, and then it comes out, and then when she had this, arose quickly and came to him. Jesus was not far off, in the same place where he had met Martha. And then, therefore, when Mary came where Jesus was, she saw him and fell at his feet, saying to him, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus therefore saw her weeping, and the Jews who came with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. Okay. And Jesus wept. Now, Jesus, what we see here is Mary falling down at the feet of Jesus. In Luke 10, we see Mary seeing Jesus as a prophet. In John 11, which is here, he's the priest. And in Matthew 26:7, he's the king. Okay. And Jesus has a role. And these are the different roles that he's got. Okay. And they get played out in different aspects of right through the Gospels. Now, Jesus, it's what we see here in 33 and 35 is Jesus having compassion. Okay. And because he was moved. Yes, he loved Lazarus, but he knew he was going to resurrect him. He already knew this. But Mary didn't. And he could see that she was so distraught that it moved him to tears. Even though he knew that Lazarus was going to be resurrected. Okay. In Mark 8:12 and Matthew 8:17, this intimates that the miracles cost Jesus something. Okay. There is actually a cost involved. Every time that Jesus actually did a miracle, there was a cost to him. When we think about the woman who had the bleeding and she touched him he felt the power removing from him. When he healed all the people up in the north near Philippi, he was actually exhausted by the end of the day. He was exhausted. And when he needed, after the feeding of the 5,000 and a teaching, he then sent his disciples and he went to pray. Praying for him was to get the nourishment back, the spiritual nourishment. That's what we need to do, is to pray and get down and get our nutrients from him. Okay. So what we see is in Isaiah 53, Jesus is depicted as a man of sorrows, and he's acquainted with grief. And we have got to understand that he understands where we are. He understands what grief we have, and he'll be with us. Okay. And he understands what we have, what we go through, whatever it might be. In 36 and 40, we see that even though they claimed Jesus to be the Messiah, they still could not comprehend what he was about to do. Okay. Now, what he did was, he actually turned around and he said to them, take away the stone. Remove the stone. That's what he asked his disciples to do. Okay. And so what we've got to remember is God generally does not do for us what we can do for ourselves. Jesus could have easily got the angels to move the stone away. They were there. He knew they were all around him. They were always there with him. Always. So he could have easily moved the stone. He's God. But he doesn't always, if we can do it, if we can do something, he will let us do it. It is what we cannot do is when he comes in and actually helps us out. It's in our weakness, not in our strength, that he actually makes us strong. So we are allowed to, we're to move the stone away. Okay. And in moving the stone away, we are doing that action. And then it's up to Jesus to do the rest. Okay. And it's a stone of unbelief, prejudice, sectarianism, anything like that. Racism. All these things are actually the stone that has to be removed. Okay. Away from someone. They have to, that's something that we can actually physically do. It isn't always up to God to do that. That is something that people have to do. So Jesus is very specific in what he does. And what he does, once that happened, he calls in a loud voice. Okay. And it isn't just, out you come. He actually says, shouts out, it's a shout. So he shouts out, Lazarus, come forth. It's not weak. He's telling it with authority, and what he has to do, what we have to remember is, this is the same voice that brought the whole of the universe into existence. He had to be micro in what he was asking. If he had been general, dear knows how many people would have come forth. He had to be specific, and he had to say, Lazarus, come forth. And when on the day that we are called on the rapture, I believe it'll be our names. We will call, we will be asleep, and he will say, Demont, come. Olivia, come. Jimmy, come. Sue, come. That's what he'll do. And we'll all hear it in our own voice. He will hear our names in the same time. In that same moment, he will actually call each of us by name. And we will be with him. That is something that I am looking forward to. So in the same way, that's the loud voice that will happen in Revelation 4. Okay. Now the grave clothes. Because Lazarus comes out. Because Martha says to Jesus, she says, Lord, he's been in the grave for 4 days. He stinks. He'll stink. There'll be this fragrance of death. And he says, no, it's okay. And when Lazarus comes out, all the people around are witnesses to this. He can't walk very well because he's bound up in grave cloth. In his grave, in his expanded clothes, it's bandaged round like a walking mummy, really. And he then tells his disciples to go and take off the clothes. So we need to be as a community in unity with each other, and we help each other to take our grave clothes off. Okay. We may have our feet unraveled, in which case we can walk, and we may have our eyes opened, our heads unraveled, but one arm may be still bandaged up. We may still have some of the grave clothes of our old life. That's what it is. It's the sin that's attached to us that we need to discard. And we'll be more and more effective the more we actually discard it. And that is the road of sanctification in Romans. So coming out and being called out is the justification. We're justified. He's risen us from the dead. We've been given life. But the taking off the burial robes, the sin, that is the sanctification. And eventually, we will have the glorification. So, Jesus works through his disciples. For example, water into wine, feeding the multitudes, rolling the stone away, freeing the grave clothes. So all this is working with each other. So we've got to work with each other. Lazarus was, like us, dead. Okay? Just as we were before we knew him. And then we're resurrected. You too can be resurrected if you choose it. The death is defeated. But bound in the grave clothes, most of us are alive, but we are hindered by our own grave clothes. So again, as I said, we have to help each other to get rid of these and to get them off us and discard whatever it is that's holding us back from being sort of doing everything for him. We also have to remember that there was witnesses. In Judaism, there only takes 2 people to witness. 2 witnesses. There was loads of people here. Loads of people who've seen someone who was dead for 4 days and taken out there and coming back to life. Wow. That meant Lazarus was dangerous because he was a witness. Not only, it was more so a dangerous witness because of to the Sadducees, because their belief was there was no resurrection. How do they explain? This man was resurrected. He was dead, and once dead and now alive. There's no resurrection. That means their whole theology is out the window. They are going to sit. So he's a dangerous man. They would want him dead. And they sought afterwards, and later on in the gospel, we find that he is actually, along with Jesus, he is actually being sought after to be killed because they do not want him to survive. Are we dangerous witnesses for Christ? That's the question. Are we going to be dangerous and be a witness? Okay. And because we have to make sure that if we witness for him, that what we do is actually strong and out there, and that the devil will consider us dangerous, because he's the enemy, the devil. And if we're not dangerous, then we're not living the proper life. If he sees us as being dangerous, then he will try and trip us up. We will get trials. We will get things happen to us because we are dangerous to him. Okay. And the beautiful thing is, and this is something that you have to put your mind in John chapter 12, verse 1 and 14:3. It all comes about, he dines with Jesus. And Mary and Martha are there, and the disciples are there, and they have this intimate dinner and meal. And this is the man who was dead and is now sitting at the table having a meal and eating. Wow. What is that? You know, it's just no words really. What we have to do is take this as a final thing here, and that is, Jesus has said that we are to eat him, devour him, and we are to drink of his blood. Okay, and that is not in Corinthians, that's in the gospel. Communion is the right thing. It's not, but we have got a little bit stuck on that. What I believe communion is, and this might be a little bit out there, and you need to test this. I think we are to be more like grazing animals, the actual unclean animal, the clean animals. Okay, the lamb, the herbivores. What they do is they munch, they graze, the grazers, and then they chew the cud, they chew it over, and then they go and eat more. They're constantly eating and mulling it over. And what we have to do with the word, because Jesus is the word, that's what we devour. This is what we devour. And this is what we drink in. And we are to basically constantly do it. It's to be this constant grazing, having a carrot in our hand, crunching, eating it away, just nibbling all the time, so that we take in all of the scripture, and so that we can actually be and become more like him. So that's the challenge for us as Christians, to actually become more like Christ by grazing on his word. And for anyone who isn't a Christian, or hasn't believed yet, then what you need to do is you need to think about what it is you're going to do, whether you want to be dead or whether you want to have life. Whether you want to die and have death and eternal separation from God, or whether you want to just fall asleep and be woken up. That is the choice that you have. And believe me, the second choice is much better than the first. Okay, and I just thank the Lord that this word, and I ask him to bless it, and for those who have ears, let them hear what has been said. Amen.